About 3 years ago, I decided to take a trip alone, looking for an isolated place where I could disconnect and relax. I found a remote Airbnb, a cabin located in the mountains about 4 hours away from my hometown. The idea of being in the middle of nature, far from the hustle and bustle of urban life, seemed perfect to me. The cabin was on a large, wooded plot, with a few other cabins nearby, well spaced apart. It was exactly what I was looking for, a peaceful and isolated place. I arrived early on Friday morning, and as soon as I settled in, I went out to explore the property. The surroundings were stunning, with tall trees and trails hidden among the shrubs. The weather was mild, and I spent a good amount of time walking around, marveling at the peace of the place. Later, as the evening approached, I sat on the back patio, on a wooden bench, watching the horizon. The landscape seemed like the perfect setting to relax. As I lost myself in my thoughts, I noticed a man walking between the trees, a little off the main trail. He seemed to be casually walking, maybe as part of a local trail, and I didn't think much of it. However, as he moved farther away, something in my instinct told me there was something strange about his presence. But I didn't pay much attention to it. Night fell, and after preparing dinner, I settled on the couch to watch a movie. During the film, I heard the doorbell ring, which surprised me as I didn't know the cabin had a doorbell. When I opened the door, I found a man standing on the porch, with a tired expression on his face. He was wearing simple clothes and looked like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "Can I help?" I asked, trying to hide my surprise. He smiled, but the smile seemed forced. He said he was lost and had wandered off the trail, needing help to get back to his cabin. Although his request seemed reasonable, something about the situation felt strange. I knew the trails in the area were well marked, and it didn't seem possible to get lost so easily there. "Sure, I'll grab my phone and see if I can help you," I replied, trying to stay calm. I closed the door and went to the couch to grab my phone. When I returned to the door, he was no longer there. The porch was empty, but at the same time, something told me he was still nearby. My instinct screamed that he was watching me. I tried to calm my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. But before I could act, a deep sound pulled me back to reality. The doorbell. The doorbell rang again. I hadn't even had time to close the door fully, and now he was there again. I froze for a second. The idea that he was back, already waiting for my next reaction, completely paralyzed me with fear. The doorbell rang once more, insistent, with a more pressing rhythm now. I knew what he wanted, and I was fully aware of the danger. He wasn't lost. He was testing me, watching, waiting for a reaction. And I had already given him exactly what he wanted. When I opened the door again, he repeated the same words, but there was something in his voice that now sounded threatening. He was no longer asking for help. He was ordering. "Can you get your phone and search for the address? I don't want to be here alone." His words echoed in my mind, but what really scared me was the coldness in his voice. He no longer seemed human. He seemed like a predator, as if he knew exactly what he was doing, as if he had tested other people before, as if this was his strategy. This was all part of a psychological game, and he was winning. I no longer knew what was real and what was in my mind. My body froze, and that's when the decision took shape. I slammed the door shut without hesitation, without thinking. The sense of urgency was almost physical, as if the air around me had become heavier, harder to breathe. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and immediately called a friend. As I spoke hurriedly, trying to articulate what was happening, reality seemed to distort. I couldn't understand what was going on, but I knew I had to leave there as quickly as possible. "You need to get out of there now," he told me in a serious and urgent voice. "Don't think twice. No matter what you have to do, just get out of there." I didn't need more words. That man, that strange being, was no longer a common threat. He was inside my mind now, manipulating me in a way I couldn't control anymore. I grabbed my things as fast as I could. I didn't want to be there anymore. When I looked again through the peephole, I searched for any sign that he was still nearby. Nothing. The cabin was silent. But as I was about to leave, something made me stop. Before I got to the car, I looked back. Through the front window of the cabin, I saw something that made me freeze. He was there, in the back of the house, watching me silently. Panic took over me. I ran to the car, slammed the door, and sped off as fast as I could. He was watching me even after I decided to leave. What he wanted, I never knew for sure. But the way he disappeared from my sight, only to reappear when I least expected it, made me understand one thing. I was never his target. I was just another piece in a game of control. And he knew exactly how to play. When I finally left, the fear didn't leave me. My body was still in a constant state of alert. Every sound, every movement in the shadows made me think he was watching me. The car felt like a prison, with the windows rolled up and the engine running, but the outside world felt even more threatening. I felt like somehow he was nearby, waiting, observing. During the drive back home, the road seemed endless. The trees around me seemed to follow me with their twisted branches, as if they were arms trying to reach out to me. I tried not to look in the rearview mirror, fearing that suddenly I would see him there, behind me, standing on the road or in some dark corner, waiting. But even when I was out of the cabin's area, the feeling of being watched never left me. I finally got home. I entered, locking the door with the feeling that my safety was now guaranteed. But as the days passed, the sense of tranquility was slowly replaced by something darker. My phone seemed heavier with each passing day, as if it were watching me with every touch. I started to think that he might be following every move I made. This idea took root in my mind, even though I tried to rationalize the opposite. I spent sleepless nights, listening to every sound out of place. The sound of the wind hitting the windows became unbearable, and the house's own noises seemed amplified. At night, when I closed my eyes, the face of that man would appear in my mind, his empty eyes and cold expression. The worst part was that I didn't know if he was still out there, or if he was just waiting for the right moment to appear again. There was something so disturbing about how he had disappeared from my sight and then reappeared like a specter, leaving me with the feeling that he would always be lurking, waiting. I tried talking about it with friends and family, but no one seemed to understand. They thought I was exaggerating, that the shock was just my body's reaction to being in such an isolated place. But I knew how I felt. I knew something was deeply wrong, something that wasn't just a distorted perception of fear. The responses I received were always the same. You're just imagining things. He was nothing special, just a lost man. But in my mind, he wasn't just a lost man. He was someone with a purpose, someone playing a psychological game, and I was no longer just a simple tourist looking for rest. I was part of his game. That night, after a normal workday, fear consumed me again. The doorbell rang. It was so soft, so sudden that my body reacted instantly, my heart racing. I froze for a second, hearing the doorbell ring again, this time more insistently. My brain was in shock. I knew he couldn't be there. I had moved, I was safe, but the sound of the doorbell seemed to echo in my mind. I dragged myself to the door, almost too scared to look through the peephole. When I finally looked, there was nothing. The yard was empty. But the terror didn't stop. I knew that at some point he would appear again, and I wasn't ready to face him again. He knew how to make me feel vulnerable, how to make me question my own sanity. I had the feeling that he was now in my subconscious, infiltrating my thoughts and manipulating me even from a distance. Over time, the cabin ceased to be just a physical place. It became a symbol of an experience I couldn't erase from my memory. Every time I saw an isolated cabin, a solitary trail, or even someone walking alone in the forest, panic would start to take over me again. I could no longer see these places peacefully. They were reminders of a game I never chose to play. I started to question myself. What did he really want? Was he just testing the limits of my patience? Or was there something darker behind his actions? For a long time, I tried to find a logical answer, but all I got were more questions, and the growing feeling that I would never know what really happened in that cabin. Had he done this to other people? How many more had been victims of his psychological game before me? The feeling of being watched never disappeared. When I saw a window, my gaze would automatically search for him, and when I heard footsteps behind me, my body would tense up. He was already in my mind and my dreams. Every time I slept, I would see him somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting. One day, I went to the Airbnb owner to try to clarify what happened, but he was evasive and uninterested. When I mentioned the man who appeared at my door, he showed no surprise, nor did he seem concerned. He just told me that it was normal to have strangers in the area and that I was probably exaggerating. Those words didn't comfort me. They knew something, or worse, maybe the owner himself was aware that people like that man were around there all the time. I was forced to accept that, at that moment, the whole experience was something I would have to carry with me without answers. Over time, I distanced myself from everything that reminded me of that cabin. The forest, the trails, even the concept of refuge or isolation became terrifying terms. Wherever I went, the feeling of being watched never completely left me. I didn't know if he was still watching me or if my mind simply refused to accept that it was over. Now, every time I see an isolated cabin or someone in the forest, a wave of terror invades me. Even after all this time, my heart races as if he could appear again at any moment. He is still out there, somewhere, waiting for the next victim, ready to play the same psychological game, making someone doubt their own perception of reality. And somewhere deep in my mind, I know I'm not the only one who has been touched by this shadow.